Okay, if I could encourage everyone to take their seat, and I'm very pleased to introduce U.S. Chamber of Commerce President and CEO Suzanne Clark for her remarks on the state of the U.S.-China commercial relationship from the perspective of the Chamber.
Wow, he didn't give you much of a break, did he? I know, you've been in this room for 2 days. It seems like you deserve a break. Anyway, thank you, Jeremy. Thank you all very much for being here. I know we're about to close out, and our final two panelists are important for you all to hear from. So I just want to take 1 minute and add some larger context to these conversations. So as we've had business leaders and government leaders and think tanks and the real whole China community here, I know you've had a lot of conversations about the risks, about the concerns, and about the opportunities. But I think from the U.S. Chamber perspective, where we are living is, yes, we need to have these conversations, we need to have this serious dialogue, but what we really need is leadership and action. I think all of us want an outcome where the world's two biggest economies can coexist in a way that isn't defined by some zero-sum metric. We want to create a framework, as the administration has laid out, where we can compete on a level playing field, where we can confront challenges in the relationship, and where we can cooperate on big global priorities. But we have all witnessed the Chinese government's prioritization of its national security intensify over the past 2 decades, with increasingly concerning actions in just the past few weeks. The Communist Party's vision of comprehensive or absolute security has never been more clear. And we're watching China employ policy tools and practices like military-civil fusion, like economic coercion, and extreme forms of digital protectionism. These are policies, these are practices in pursuit of China's absolute security that, together with massive state subsidies, unfair commercial practices, and human rights abuses, have made the world less secure. In fact, it is the stated goal of the Chinese government to make the world more reliant on China. And yet they've deviated from the path of global economic integration that's been essential to their own success in lifting Chinese people out of poverty. And its move away from openness and fair treatment for foreign investors has often undermined its goals of becoming a more innovative and competitive economy. Chinese leaders have made it clear that they have a distaste for markets. They favor state-owned enterprises, and their strong preference for mercantilism over the rules-based order that facilitated their own rise. What's also clear is that these national security policies and actions are not open for debate or negotiation. We all know that when it comes to the United States preserving our interests, we must also safeguard our national security, our values. The U.S. Chamber does support targeted and responsible steps to restrict Chinese access to sensitive technologies that could be used to undermine our national security, including export controls, technology restrictions, and scrutiny of outbound investment. The Chamber has been publicly raising concerns about Chinese policies and practices for decades. In fact, the Trump administration's 2018 Section 301 investigation cited U.S. Chamber reports and analysis raising serious concerns over China's deteriorating trade and investment climate some 50 times. And we continue to speak out, as we did just 2 weeks ago when we criticized China's recent actions against U.S. firms. China's newly revised counter-espionage law, its raids on Western due diligence and consulting firms, its evolving restrictions on Western accounting firms have ratcheted up risk and uncertainty in the market. The Chamber has endorsed the mission of the House Select Committee on China to focus on threats to American security, and in a moment we're going to hear from those committee leaders. We know that all of you in the business community and at the Chamber, we are ready to work with the committee on this priority. But to be clear, not every economic interaction with China poses a national security risk. There is still a vast area of commercial opportunity where we can and should engage productively. Transactions that don't pose a threat to national security strengthen the U.S. economy, create opportunities for U.S. small businesses, and improve the standard of living for millions of Americans. But perhaps most importantly, and I really can't underline this enough, if we treat every economic interaction as a risk, we will lose focus on those that really, truly pose a threat. So look, I know we want to hear from the next panel. I just want to say quickly that we know there is a lot of work this administration and the cabinet officials can do. We know we need a multifaceted and coordinated approach from the U.S. government, whether that's Secretary of State, working on all the challenges of Taiwan, Ukraine, nuclear threats, but also building people-to-people ties. Treasury Secretary Yellen and what she's doing with the Chinese Vice Premier. Commerce Secretary Raimondo, the Agricultural Secretary. I mean, this is a $700 billion trade relationship, including a new record of $41 billion in U.S. ag exports to China. We know that this work is crucial to having mutually beneficial commerce between the two countries. And U.S. Trade Rep Tai should follow through on the long-standing promise to lift tariffs on many products where they no longer serve a strategic purpose. And the Chinese must do the same. Ambassador Tai should enforce the 2020 Phase 1 deal with China and ensure that Beijing meets its commitments. We remain realistic, however, about the widening differences between the U.S. and Chinese systems. It's unlikely we will be able to quickly bridge entrenched differences. It's going to take a lot of hard work on both sides to find the places that we can and should cooperate. It's one of the reasons that we will continue to push and support global engagement as a means to addressing the challenges in the relationship. To achieve real, secure supply chain alternatives to China, we need meaningful trade arrangements with other countries, with other markets. Some of those trade agreements, like the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement, are in place, but they've got to be strengthened if we're going to leverage their potential. I was just in Ottawa with Prime Minister Trudeau and his team, and we had this exact conversation. North America is poised to compete on critical minerals, on their mining, on their processing, if we work through some of these issues in the trade relationship and tackle domestic problems we have here, like permitting reform. But this administration's reluctance to pursue new trade agreements means we are losing key footholds in Asia and in Africa, while China and other global partners move forward without us. We will continue to press this administration to get bolder on trade, to cooperate with global partners who share our values, such as Europe. We just had 30 AmChams from Europe here on Monday, and one of the topics was about how the West has to counterbalance China's influence on the global economy. We've got a bunch of opportunities coming up for U.S. government and business leaders to continue to think about this agenda. We have the G7 in Japan, the Quad in Australia, the IPEF ministerial in the U.S., the TTC coming up in Sweden. Look, this is as complicated as a challenge gets. But we are a great nation and we can do hard things. Too often in public policy debates, we're presented false, oversimplified binary choices: border security or legal immigration, spending restraint or meeting our debt obligations, energy security or climate mitigation. And in the case of China, national security or a trade relationship worth nearly $1 trillion. Make no mistake, national security must come first, but it does not have to come at the expense of our economic future. And the reason we have conferences like this, the reason we bring you together, serious-minded people together, is because these approaches require expertise and nuance. We can't take a blunt approach to China like decoupling. I know you've all been talking about the fact that we need a surgical approach, and the Chamber will continue to provide a platform and a voice for the business community to serve their interests, to protect our national security, to advance our economy, and to ensure our future strength and competitiveness. Thank you for being with us.